Welcome to Yin Yoga Lifestyle. I am your host, Colette Darville. Cultivating our body's resilience and inner silence and its application to all aspects of your life. Let's become enlightened and enjoy the power of intuitiveness and creativity. You are listening to Society Bites Radio, social interaction for the mind and soul. Hello, and thank you for joining us today. I am your host, Colette Darville, and this is Yin Yoga Lifestyle. So now let us take a deep meditative breath. Inhale, so, exhale, hum. Dr. Steve Davis is the Everglades Foundation's Vice President of Communications and Engagement, as well as the Senior Ecologist. A native of Ohio, he earned a PhD from the Florida International University in 1999 with research in Florida Bay and the coastal Everglades. Dr. Davis joined the Everglades Foundation in 2009 as a member of the science department, and he became a key voice in support of the organization's mission to restore America's Everglades. He draws upon his 25 years of Everglades science and teaching experience, including 10 years as a professor of wetland ecology at Texas A&M University, to lead science, communication, and outreach efforts focused on Everglades restoration, ecosystem health, and impacts of sea level rise. Welcome to Yin Yoga Lifestyle, Dr. Davis.
Thanks, Colette. It's great to join you.
Thank you so much for being here. And I know it is a yoga lifestyle podcast, but we are so much connected to our environment that it just seemed natural that you enlighten us more on what's going on in what you do. Can you tell us a bit about your background and how you came to work for the Everglades Foundation?
Well, my goodness, if I go back to my childhood and think about what got me interested in the environment, it was spending time with my grandfather, who was a farmer, and just, having hands in the soil and understanding the connection between our environment and our food and our health, and understanding that clean water was a big part of that. That inspired me to study it when I entered into college and then graduate school, and continued that through my research at Texas A&M University, focusing on the Everglades and coastal waters in Texas. And then today with the Everglades Foundation, it's always been about understanding the health of our environment, the connection with clean water, and the impacts that we've imposed on it, and how we can fix that.
So it's always been in your blood.
I think so. And to this day, I always feel a special connection when I'm exploring the environment, whether it's the lowland, wetland habitats of the Everglades or hiking in the mountains. It's just always understanding and appreciating the connection between the environment, these habitats, and our health.
Now, I would say that you're an environment whisperer. Absolutely. And the Everglades ecosystem, now it's much bigger than the Everglades National Park, isn't it? Can you describe the scope of this ecosystem and why it's important to Floridians, but is also important to the rest of the country and the world, really, too, isn't it?
It's a massive ecosystem, and really there are only a handful of places across the planet that are like it. Think of maybe the Okavango Delta in Africa, the Pantanal in South America. The Everglades is really on par with those massive wetland ecosystems and the richness of diversity. The Everglades is half its original size, but even still, we're talking millions of acres. Everglades National Park is really just the southern terminus of this river of grass that extended all the way up over 100 miles from the Florida Keys to the southern rim of Lake
Wow.
Okeechobee, and a river of grass over 50 miles wide.
Wow.
And the headwaters of that ecosystem extended another 100 miles from Lake Okeechobee up to Orlando, where Disney World is. So it was a huge connected, flowing environment, and we changed that. We changed it partly out of ignorance, not understanding the importance of this ecosystem, but really it was about sort of driving the economy forward of that time. Back in the 1920s, 1930s, it was about agriculture, and it was about really providing crops year round for populations in the north, where I come from Ohio, and we've got a pretty narrow growing season.
Right.
Down here in South Florida, you can grow crops year round. The only challenge was getting access to those rich muck soils required draining those wetlands. And so there was a lot of incentive to drain the Everglades. And again, not knowing what Florida would become, where now we are much more connected to the health of our waterways as a population now in South Florida approaching 9 million. The state itself is approaching 22 million. And so there's a lot more pressure on our natural resources, and protecting the health of our waterways is really at the top of that list. And the Everglades being the largest of our aquatic ecosystems, that's the really the primary focus of our work at the Everglades Foundation.
And that's what my next question was. The Everglades Foundation mission is to restore the Everglades. Now, a lot of people will say, oh, okay, well, that's great. I'm glad somebody's doing it, right? But can you tell us what that really means? Like, what does that mean? I mean, you can't just do it by yourself. You need other people who are educated and the population to be a little bit more aware.
Exactly. And in part, it's understanding the sheer scale of this system. It's not just Everglades National Park. And quite frankly, it's not just environmental restoration. What Everglades restoration is, it's a modernization of South Florida's water infrastructure. And for anyone that's spent any time in South Florida, you know that we're flat, we're low-lying, and that makes flood control a challenge. And so we have this infrastructure, thousands of miles of canals and levees and pumps and gates that allow water managers to move water largely off of developed areas and keep it in the wet areas. But this infrastructure that was designed for the 20th century economy of agriculture, what it did was it really didn't have much concern about the environment. It was about just getting rid of water. And so what Everglades restoration does is that it modernizes our water infrastructure to maintain those critical services of flood control and water supply for developed areas, but it does a much better job for the environment and for the Everglades, for the estuaries around South Florida, from Sanibel Island and Fort Myers, all the way down to the Florida Keys, Biscayne Bay, all the way up to Port St. Lucie. And so that's a pretty lengthy stretch of Florida coastline that Everglades restoration benefits. And so within that, you're talking about, again, close to 9 million people that will benefit in terms of water supply, in terms of improved environmental health. Even real estate values are coupled with the health of waterways. Clean water obviously benefits real estate. And so for various reasons, not just our public health, but our economy is tied to the health of these environments. And so Everglades restoration in many ways, it benefits us both
Mhm.
environmentally and economically.
Yeah, and you're very right there. I live in Hollywood, Florida, and as we know, when we live on the coast, there are some times where we do get flooding, and it's a little bit disconcerting. But the Everglades function as a buffer to protect the state of Florida from inland flooding, doesn't it? And I know that we just sort of touched on that, but and as storm surges, as the ocean sort of levels continue to rise, can you explain how this natural process happens?
Sure, happy to. And when you consider that now the Everglades, and especially Everglades National Park at
Mm,
the southern end of the peninsula, is cut off from the flow of fresh water for several months out of the year.
yeah.
When we get into the dry season, there's no pressure to push against rising seas, and so
Mm,
sea level rise and the saltwater intrusion has made it much further inland, simply because we're not providing enough freshwater flow through this ecosystem. So we're experiencing impacts associated with that. We're experiencing threats to our water supply wells that are near the coast here in
mm,
South Florida, and so the more water we can put back into the Everglades, the more we can push against that and help to maintain those water supply wells. But we can't stop sea level rise with Everglades restoration. What we can do is slow the impacts that we've been experiencing. In terms
mm.
of understanding storm surge, uh, the Everglades is really the perimeter of this ecosystem is a pretty formidable stand of mangroves, which
Yeah.
some folks don't understand. These are they look like trees at the top, but down at the bottom they just look like these tangled webs of roots that help to fortify our coastline here in South Florida. These are tropical trees that grow along the coastline, and they really help to anchor the land and even grow land
Mm,
vertically as they exist through time. And so protecting the Everglades means protecting this tangled network of mangroves that provides great habitat for fish, but it also helps to protect our coastline when we experience storm surges like Hurricane Irma in 2017. It's pretty well accepted now that massive stretch of mangrove forest along Florida's southwest coast really absorbed a lot of that storm's energy and helped to dissipate it as it made its way north.
yeah, and I don't think people realize that their environment really helps protect them somewhat from these storm surges. Um, and one of the other things I had to ask was the effects of the Everglades on the unique ecosystems and wildlife as climate changes start and sea levels rise. Um, what happens to the wildlife? What happens to all the ecosystems that are relying on these say on the mangroves on the areas of the Everglades that is their home? What happens to them?
Well, they either find suitable habitat or their local populations or
Mm,
even species will cease to exist.
right.
And it's really about allowing those habitats to and think of coastal habitats like mangroves. Naturally, they would migrate landward or
Hmm.
seaward with changes in sea level over geological time. What we're experiencing with sea level rise and mangrove transition in the Everglades is a more abrupt change resulting in habitat loss. Basically, the changes are happening so quickly that the habitats don't have enough time to be able to
Mm.
migrate and adapt. And there are some other things that take place that require more time to get into.